I'm gonna find, and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
So I just finished The Last of Us 2, and there's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about after the ending of the game. For those of you who don't know, I recently just completed The Last of Us Part 1 for the first time, about a couple of weeks ago, on stream. And it was a great time. I thoroughly enjoyed that game, and obviously I was playing it in anticipation for the sequel, The Last of Us 2. And I just want to say straight off the bat that I loved this game. I know there's been a lot of controversy regarding the game, whether or not its story's good, whether or not its characters are good, whether or not the direction it went in was good, whether or not the pacing was good. And I want to say I love this game. It was one of those games that when I played it, I didn't want it to end. It's one of those games where the stories and characters and environments and world building completely draws you in. So no, this isn't going to be a video of me shitting on The Last of Us Part 2, though that doesn't mean I don't have my personal critiques of the game. So today we've got a little off-the-cuff video. I finished The Last of Us 2 last night. It was around 3 AM that I finished it, and as soon as I finished the game, I basically scrolled down a bunch of notes regarding the good things about the game, the bad things, and basically a little few points regarding my conclusion. So I'm going to build off of them and basically ramble about this game because there's so much to talk about, and my mind has honestly been racing thinking about this game. I just want to talk about it, get all this shit off my chest. Who knows, maybe my opinions will change later down the line. It tends to happen quite a lot. Maybe I'll have different opinions about the game in the future. Who knows? I don't care. Right now we're talking about my initial opinions on The Last of Us Part 2. I just want to say this video is going to have huge spoilers for the game, so if you haven't played it, don't watch this video. Simple as, you have been warned. So without further ado guys, let's get straight into this ramble. So the structure of this video is going to be very simple. I'm going to talk about the positive things about the game, and then afterwards I'm going to talk about my critiques of the game and the things that I don't think were handled necessarily all that well. But remember, this is all my opinion, so if you feel differently, feel free to give your opinion in the comment section below. It would be much appreciated because any discussion about this game is a welcome one. So starting off, the game is graphically and mechanically better than the first game. The movement in this game is so utterly smooth and realistic. It's so natural. I don't know how they've managed to do this. I've never seen a game with this much polish in terms of movement or animations or the character interacting with the open world. Like, it is honestly crazy. I think the best animations really shine during the combat when, you know, Ellie's struggling against an infected or someone's grabbing her, grappling her, and she's struggling to get away. You can really see the time and effort that was put into meticulously crafting each and every animation in this game, and I think that's a testament just to the attention of detail that Naughty Dog puts in pretty much all of their games, and honestly I think they've raised the bar this time. After finishing The Last of Us Part 2, I sat there, and not only was I sad the story was over, and not only was I sad that I wasn't going to be able to explore these amazing environments anymore, but I knew that any game I play after this is not going to have this level of polish. And I think that's something that people take for granted with these types of single-player narrative experiences, especially those from Naughty Dog. It's almost like people expect it at this point and therefore don't want to praise them on it. But I think The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the most impressive games I've ever played. The combat itself is far more difficult than the first game. I think the first game, the aiming was a lot easier, enemies were less intelligent, they were less aggressive, but this time round, the enemies wanna fucking kill you. I played this game on normal difficulty, and honestly, it was still pretty difficult in places, because the AI is pretty intelligent. The human AI will try and flank you, they'll try and box you into a corner, they'll try and push you out of cover and flash you out. The infected AI was also a lot more intelligent. They can see you better, they can hear you better, and they're just generally more of a threat. Something I noticed while playing through the first game is it was incredibly easy to land headshots on enemies, which means that you didn't really have to use that much ammo, and it means that you could pretty much end combat situations pretty quickly. It wasn't that difficult at all. Obviously, I'm speaking from my experience. I played on normal difficulty on that game. I'm sure grounded is a lot harder, but still, I think with the movement of enemies, the more realistic weighty gunplay, it makes the game a whole lot more difficult. When there's infected running at you and it's dark and you're afraid for your life and you're trying to survive, you're not going to land headshots all the time. So it makes sense the weapon sway is a lot more punishing in this game, and you actually have to take your time to line up your shots perfectly to be able to get these kills off, which honestly, it makes the combat situations feel much more frantic and much more natural, instead of just being able to basically one-pop everyone within the vicinity. But of course, it's not just ranged weapons you can use in this game. There is a huge array of melee weapons, and honestly, the animations for these kills with these melee weapons, they're crazy. Like, you can crack someone's head open with a sledgehammer, you can slice someone's side open with an axe, or dig into someone's shoulder with a machete. The melee weapon kills in this game, they're pretty brutal, and I think it really shows the survivalistic nature of this game, that you're willing to kill anyone in any way possible just to survive. So yeah, there's a pretty extensive range of weaponry in this game. Basically similar to what we had in The Last of Us 1, but all the guns feel a lot nicer. Something that I also appreciate is that Abby and Ellie have two separate loadouts. The guns are pretty much the same archetype, but they're actually different weapons and they feel different to use, which is just another bit of attention to detail. The crafting system is also something that I found really satisfying throughout the game, mainly because whenever you craft something, it actually shows the character making it, and there's all these satisfying sound effects and clicking and like sliding barrels onto guns and sliding different attachments around. It's basically the scene from Toy Story where that dude's cleaning Woody. That's what it's like, but you're just putting attachments on a fucking like rifle. Overall, the weapon upgrade system works exactly the same as it did in the first game. You pick up different parts around the open world, and when you find a workbench, you can then apply upgrades to it. But I do really appreciate the attention to detail that they included with this, where it does show the animations of them building whatever you crafted, because again, it grounds the game more in reality, suspends your disbelief more, and it also shows that attention to detail once again. Obviously, the normal crafting system from the first game is back as well, where you can craft bombs, you can craft shivs, you can craft melee upgrades, you can craft medkits, molotovs, all that sort of stuff, and obviously that is as good as it was in the first game. There was no need to change it, you only had to add to it, add more things you could create, which is exactly what they did, so I have no problems there. It worked well in the first game, and the way I see it, if it's not broke, don't fix it, just add to it. They also went that extra step and made it so Abby and Ellie can craft different things, which I think complements their playstyle. Abby can craft incendiary shotgun rounds and hunting pistol rounds and more combat oriented things, whereas Ellie is more of a stealth, environmental character that uses opportunities to her advantage to get the better of opponents that do outclass her in terms of strength. At the end of the day, they're completely different people and completely different characters, so the differentiation in crafting is very, very welcome. Obviously, the crafting plays into the stealth too. I think the stealth in this game is honestly amazing. One moment in particular stands out in my mind, which is the stealth section in the hotel when you're playing as Abby and you've got to get the gas mask for Lev. That section where it's completely dark and there's a massive infestation, oh, that's fucking terrifying. There wasn't many moments in the first game where you genuinely felt threatened and scared because of the infected. They were always pretty dumb, always pretty easy to deal with. But in the second game, they're definitely more of a threat. I died so much to the infected whilst playing this game, and this one section in the hotel was a testament to how terrifying they had made the infected in this game, especially the stalkers. Because obviously, when you're in a stealth section, you rely on your listening feature, and stalkers, you can't use your listening feature to see them through walls. You have to go in completely blind. So walking about in this area where there's clickers and stalkers all over the place, it was pretty terrifying. To be honest, I find it more enjoyable and exhilarating having stealth sections with infected opposed to stealth sections where there's humans, because obviously we're used to killing humans. There's not many games where you get to stealth zombies, basically. It's quite a unique concept. I can't think of any other games where you can really do that, so it's quite exhilarating having these massive areas filled with infected and you have to clear them out without them noticing you're there. I think it's a lot more fun. Regardless, the entire game is fun, but it's not just the gameplay itself and the combat that's amazing. I think the exploration in this game is second to none in single player titles. I haven't played a game where I feel as grounded or involved in the world as I have with The Last of Us Part 2, and I'm really glad they brought back the exploration from the first game where you can go into random buildings and like track off into different areas and loot and see what other things are happening there. It's just so nice. It makes you feel like a part of this world. It's not one of those linear games in the sense that you have one set path and you have to go down that path and you have to run into enemies, kill them and go down another path. It's not like that. You can veer off the pathway, you can go into other buildings, you can explore, you can see what happened to the people that previously owned the building if you want to explore a little bit. You can find treasure, you can find loot, you can find loads of different things to do, little puzzles that lead to rooms filled with supplies that you can take. It's just so extensive, and the amount of detail they added into these optional areas is just astonishing. One thing I think that makes these little optional side areas even more amazing is the environmental world building through things such as notes, the safe puzzles, character cues, corpses, and just general exploration around the area. Say if you stumble across an abandoned building, you want to search it for supplies. You can also learn a lot about the people that were previously living there and the people that were there during the outbreak, simply by exploring, having a look around, listening to what Ellie has to say, or most importantly, I'd say picking up notes. The notes in the first game were an amazing way to build this world up and give you an idea of what the people inside of it are like. And I think the format of rewarding players for their exploration with these notes as a way to give them some backstory about the world, it's good to see that format coming back, because again, it worked in the first game, there's no need to change it. Now, enough of the gameplay, enough talking about exploration, and enough talking about combat. I think we should get down to the real controversial topics of the video that has been debated by many people since the release of this game. That is the story and characters. And I see nowhere else fitting to start other than talking about Ellie herself, as the game is centered around her. Now, Ellie is really interesting in this game. I want to start off by saying I really like the way her character was handled. I think she's realistic, but she's also still that girl from the first game that we grew to love so much. It is strange seeing her character change from this optimistic young girl who had all the hope in the world and just wanted to be loved, to someone who was socially reclusive, someone who didn't seem to fit in, and someone who had a lot of pent-up anger and rage. Now, obviously this is normal for it to happen to someone in her situation. I mean, you know, she was a young girl, she put her trust in Joel lied to her, so eventually she harbored resentment for him. That's how it works, and you can see in the beginning of the game their relationship is not quite what it used to be, which is quite sad, because obviously we all loved Joel and Ellie's relationship in the first game. I think it was amazing, and they do touch on, you know, young Ellie a little bit more in this game as well through flashbacks. But in many ways, it's quite sad to see Ellie grow up and become a person that she never intended to be. You know, when she was a kid, again, she had all this juvenile innocence and she was filled with hope about the world, and obviously cynicism sets in as you get older, and she became this sort of dark individual. She'd lost so much in her life. But at the beginning of the game, she didn't know that she had more to lose. I wish this was explored more in the game, but Ellie and Joel did not see eye to eye right before his death. In fact, right at the end of the game, it shows their final conversation together before Joel dies, and she wasn't happy with him. She wasn't happy with how he got involved in her life. She wasn't happy with how he was overprotective of her. She wasn't happy with the way he got involved in her friends and her patrols. And she was still mad about the fact that he essentially didn't let her die. She would have given up her life to make that cure for everyone. And he took that away from her. So you can see from Ellie's perspective how angry she'd be at Joel. And it's really sad to see their relationship and the state it was in just before Joel died. And I think in many ways Ellie holds herself accountable for Joel's death. And I think she blames herself for not patching things up and forgiving him before he died. Because he died, and in their last conversation she said, "I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive you." And that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. She never got to actually tell him that she forgave him and was ready to move past it. He died believing that Ellie hadn't forgiven him. And I think as time progresses through the game, I think she comes more to terms with Joel and why he did it, why he did what he did. It was a selfish act, fair enough, but I think as she begins to grieve more, she understands why Joel didn't want to lose her. Which takes us to the scene at the beginning of the game with Ellie and Joel in Jackson. It seems like she's around 14 or maybe 15, something like that, but she's basically around the age she was in the first game. And Joel plays Future Days by Pearl Jam to her, which is a superb song, and the rendition in this game is amazing, but it has symbolic meaning in the game as well, because obviously Joel was afraid of losing Ellie, but in the end it was Ellie that lost Joel. And I think this song is definitely foreshadowing to something happening to one of the two of them. And this song is referenced a couple more times throughout the course of the game. One time when Ellie plays it on her guitar in the theater in Seattle, and one time when she plays it right at the end of the game when she's back in her house after everything that's happened. And I think the use of this song has really nice symbolic meaning in the game. Obviously, Joel was afraid to lose her, but upon Ellie losing Joel from her life, I think she was able to almost forgive him, because she understands what it would mean to lose someone that essentially means the world to her. Joel was basically her father, and she was a daughter to Joel. So much like how Joel saved Ellie's life when he was given the opportunity, I think Ellie definitely would have saved Joel's life if she was able to. Obviously, she was overpowered and forced to watch him die. But if she had the power in that situation, she wouldn't have let him die. Not at all. Regardless of whether or not they saw eye to eye or not. The story of Ellie is really tragic. It's, to me, a descent into vengeance and the process of basically losing yourself and everything else that you love just to get revenge on one person. And you really see Ellie's mental state deteriorate the more she loses throughout the game. I mean, she starts off and she's pissed off at Abby for doing what she did, and she's pissed off at the wolves for coming after Joel and taking away the one person that seemed to understand her. But she was still level-headed. She still knew what she was doing. Whereas I think the deeper down the rabbit hole she goes, the more wolves she kills, the closer she gets to Abby, the more obsessive she becomes. Which is why, when they head back from Seattle, and they choose to make a life somewhere else, she gives that all up. All of that she worked so hard for, that life with Dina that she made, she gives that up for revenge. And in the end, she doesn't even exact her revenge. So she did it all for nothing. The scene where she fights Abby right at the end, it felt uncomfortable because Ellie didn't even want to do it. You could see it in her face when she was drowning, when she was trying to drown Abby. She's crying. She doesn't want to do it, but she felt as if she had to. She felt as if she owed something to Tommy. She felt as if she owed it to the memory of Joel. And it's an incredibly powerful scene. It shows her complete mental deterioration. Everything that she had in her life, everything that she worked for. She was with Dina, she had a child, she had a nice house, she had a nice place to live, a pretty nice life. But she couldn't let go of what happened in her past. And I think that's a testament to her mental deterioration as the game goes on. Her priorities were not set straight. And for years, she lived with that resentment for the wolves, that resentment for herself, for letting Abby go. And it basically became too much for her. And in the end, she didn't even get her revenge. Because she wasn't sure what she wanted. Because she was put in a situation where she didn't necessarily know how to feel. And I think this feeling is reflected onto the player throughout the game. They do a really good job of selling you Ellie's side of the story, and then cutting away and then selling you Abby's side of the story for the rest of the game. And it puts you in that position that Ellie found herself in when she was about to kill Abby. Do I really want to do this? Does she actually deserve it? Am I right in doing this, or is this just revenge for the sake of revenge? Not gonna lie, at the beginning of the game, I hated Abby. Like, I detested her, because I think Joel is amazing. We all love Joel, obviously, because we played as him in the first game. So, the way that Naughty Dog were able to do this switch, and blur the moral lines and make me think, should Abby actually die? Does she deserve it? It's fair enough she killed Joel, but Joel had it coming. So, was Abby actually a bad person? And I feel like that was what Naughty Dog wanted to convey, what Ellie was feeling. That's what she was feeling. She didn't know whether she wanted to kill Abby. She didn't know whether it was the right thing to do. And in that last moment, I think she realized that she had wasted a lot of her life chasing this. Ellie is a superbly written character. She's incredibly deep. She goes through a lot of trauma, and you're along for that ride. And you experience secondhand all that trauma that she goes through throughout the game. And to be honest, you can't necessarily blame her for being vengeful and spiteful and dark and antisocial, and because she wasn't even meant to be alive, if you think about it. She was meant to die in the Firefly Hospital, and she was meant to cure the world. They were meant to be able to develop a vaccine from her. Fair enough, she would die, but the rest of the world would be saved. This game is basically following the story of someone who shouldn't be there anyway. And I think Ellie feels that, and that's why she doesn't necessarily value her life and was so quick to chase after these people. Honestly, the only thing that was keeping Ellie going after the death of Joel was partially Dina, but I think for the most part it was that burning hatred for Abby after she killed Joel, and I think that's what spurred her on. Her story is really sad. Like, after playing The Last of Us Part 2, looking back to the character she was in the first game, it's just so sad that she became this dark individual. Because she was such a good kid in the first game. You know, she was always joking, cracking little jokes here and there, taking the piss out of Joel, and she just becomes this cold killer, really. Anyway, let's stop talking about Ellie. I could ramble on about her character for so long. There's so much to talk about regarding her character. Let's have a little chat about the side characters in this game. So let's start off with Jesse, because he's probably the least interesting and most straightforward character. Basically, he's there to be the good guy, the supportive friend. You know, he's a believable friend. Ellie and Jesse's relationship is incredibly believable, and he serves the purpose that he serves. He's the good guy. He's there to make you feel comfortable. He's there to say, "Oh, I'm gonna help you out. You know, I'm here to protect you," and shit like that. But ultimately, he's kind of a throwaway character. He gets shot in the face by Abby near the end, and it's an unremarkable death for an unremarkable character. That's the way I'm gonna put it. He's not anything amazing. Doesn't mean I don't like him. I actually quite enjoy the scenes where it's just Ellie shooting the shit with Jesse. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's anything spectacular or special. Tommy's basically how you remember him from the first game. He's basically Joel, but with a ponytail. I like Tommy. Like, I've got a soft spot for Uncle Tommy. He's great. You know, simply because maybe he's a returning character, because he mirrors Joel in some senses, maybe. I think Tommy's a decent character, but again, he doesn't do an awful lot in this story. To be honest, he has more of a place in the flashbacks. I really, really love the section where it's Ellie basically doing the rounds with Tommy and sniping all the infected from that ridge. It's just a really nice scene, because you barely ever get to see Ellie and Tommy bonding, and seeing that is like indicative that she did have that sort of family unit. You know, she had an uncle figure, she had a father figure, she had friends, and it really is a testament to how times have changed in the game. You know, it started off, and you know, when she was like 15, 16, and she was living in Jackson and everything was fine, to when she was crawling through the grimy streets of Seattle on a suicide mission, essentially. So the contrast there is really interesting, and that's what flashbacks are meant to do. They're meant to show a stark contrast. Speaking of flashbacks, I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room and talked about Joel. Not necessarily his death, we'll get onto that a little bit later on, but I want to talk about his character and the way it was handled in The Last of Us Part 2. Obviously, there's no character discrepancies with Joel I can think of whatsoever. He's the same Joel we knew from the first game, only he's a little bit more mellow in this game. I really love the opening section of the game that allows you to play as Joel as you're riding back into Jackson. You see the sunset, you see the landscape. It was breathtaking. I will never be able to experience that moment again for the first time, but I think it's one of those introductions to a game that you don't forget. It's just so impressive. And I think poetically, it was passing the torch off from Joel to Ellie, because obviously playing as Joel for the beginning of the game, we never get to play as him again. I think it was symbolically saying, goodbye Joel, we're not going to play as you anymore, we're going to follow the story of someone else because your time is over. That's what it felt like to me, at least. It's just a big shame that most of Joel's character moments took place in flashbacks. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I didn't enjoy these moments. I think they were great. It was amazing to see Ellie and Joel teaming up again. But it's just a shame that he didn't do much before he died. Although we'll get more onto that later. For now, we'll talk about what I think was good about his character. I really loved the flashbacks with Joel because it was a stark contrast to Ellie being by herself in the situation we found ourselves in the present day, and it took a step back and made it feel a bit more like how The Last of Us 1 did, when you were basically just exploring with Joel, talking shit, and generally just sort of enjoying your time. One of my favourite moments in the entire game, or favourite sequences in the entire game, was Ellie's birthday. That flashback where it cuts to the dinosaur museum and you're basically walking around in there and looking at all the exhibits and making jokes, and it just felt so Last of Us. It felt so Naughty Dog, and they know how to write downtime moments like that like no one else does. They really are wizards when it comes to writing. The flashbacks with Joel are those moments where you realise how special of a game it is that you're playing. Like, The Last of Us Part 2 made me feel emotions that not many games do, like, these days. It's such a rare thing where you find a game that grips you in the way that the story and characters of this world did for me. We'll talk a little bit more about Joel later, but until then, let's move on to Dina. Dina is actually one of my favourite characters in this game. I think she was done incredibly well, and I think the relationship between Ellie and Dina was really, really natural, and it just felt human. The way they interacted with each other, the way they spoke to each other, it was human. I've got some issues with it, but my issue isn't the fact that they're lesbian, which some people have been going crazy about. It's not the fact that Dina's a bad character or anything like that. It's because they weren't given enough time. I wanted to see more of how their relationship developed, but it was brushed under the rug. The thing that The Last of Us Part 1 did so well was developing relationships, not only in cutscenes, but through gameplay. Now, it was great travelling around with Dina. I thought it was amazing, but we needed more of that, and we didn't get it. Which is why I think a lot of people were upset with Dina as a character and Ellie and Dina's relationship, because it wasn't given enough time to flourish in front of the player. And I don't know how they got this wrong. This is something they've done countless times in previous games. It's the Naughty Dog way of allowing you to become attached to a character. They did the same with Nadine in Uncharted 4, which spawned her own game essentially, Lost Legacy. You know, Nadine was just a side character, but the interactions we had with her through the game of Uncharted 4 meant that she became a fan favourite. Same with Chloe in Uncharted 2. You know, she was a bit of a bitch at first, but after playing with her, and, well, playing with her. Nate definitely plays with her. Chloe in Uncharted 2, you know, she's a bit of a bitch at first, but after exploring with her and after getting to know her character, you actually learn that she's not who she says she is, and there's more to find out about her character. So I don't know why they decided to go, you know, Dina, that character that's got like a really important meaning in the story, and she's very important to Ellie, and it'd be great to get to know her more. Yeah, let's just make her pregnant, so then she can't do anything for the entire game. Because that's how you do character development. You just cut a character out the story, essentially. This is one of my big discrepancies with the narrative of The Last of Us. I think Dina should have been included way more, but instead she was swept under the rug a little bit, and I think that was the wrong thing to do. Regardless, I really like Dina's character, and I think the character moments that she shares with Ellie are some of the best moments in the game, so I really don't have a lot of complaints there, apart from the fact that I wish there was more of her, which, to be fair, isn't really even that much of a complaint. Something that I was really surprised about was the fact that I liked the side characters in Abby's story. I didn't think I'd be able to, but I actually did quite like them. Manny being one that I really, really liked. I thought he was just a cool guy. He was a genuine friend, and you could see that him and Abby had been friends for years, and they were incredibly comfortable in each other's company, and they just used to crack jokes and do stupid shit, and he'd take the piss out of her, and it was just a funny, healthy relationship. And the moment that he dies, I was actually sad. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was surprised that I was disappointed of his death, because he was involved in the killing of Joel, and he was the dude that spits on Joel's corpse as he's sitting there. But I actually really liked Manny, which again goes to show the moral lines of this game's story being blurred, which I absolutely adore. It's not something that people can pull off very often, where they make you understand the other side of the story. But I think, especially making Manny the likable character that he was, that really helped push this narrative that maybe Abby and the Wolves weren't such bad people in the first place. Speaking of blurring the moral lines between good and evil and who's right and who's wrong, I think Lev and Yara from Abby's story do a good job of humanizing the Seraphites. So the way that Manny and Mel and all the other characters from the Wolves have humanized the Wolves, Lev and Yara humanize the Seraphites, which is a bit of a crazy thing to say, because they are an insane cult that string people up from there by their guts and fucking torture people, but they also are capable of harboring genuine people within their midst. Like, Lev didn't want to be part of everything that was happening. He was just indoctrinated into it. Same with Yara. Their mother abused them, and they were forced into this life that they really didn't choose for themselves, but had to stick in to survive. I'm going to admit, I wasn't a massive fan of Lev at first, and I still don't think he's the most amazing character in the game. But I think it does a good job of showing how people have to work together if they want to survive. And this shared need for survival can sometimes lead to friendship, which is how Abby and Lev came to be friends, you know? The Last of Us is a world that is full of unlikely friendships, and it is very poetic that the two groups that were meant to be fighting each other to the death, two deserters from each respective group, became friends because they had both lost everything else. It sounds a bit like Joel and Ellie, does it not? The story of The Last of Us 2 gripped my heart and had me on the edge of my seat at every turn, with the various flashbacks cutting back to Joel and Ellie as they were in The Last of Us, Ellie's slow descent into vengeance after the death of Joel and other friends. I mean, even Abby's story was written in a compelling way. I do have some critiques, but I'm going to save that for a bit later on in the video. But overall, her story was written well. The storytelling in The Last of Us Part 2 is delivered in a way that only Naughty Dog can. I've never had the pleasure of playing a game that is as polished, as refined, or as well presented as The Last of Us Part 2. I genuinely believe that this is the current greatest example of a narrative-based single-player game to date. However, that doesn't mean it's perfect, so let's chat about the few things that I didn't necessarily like about the game, and when I say few, I mean it's very, very few. First things first, I'm going to address something that many other people have talked about in their videos regarding The Last of Us Part 2, and that is the strange marketing they use for this game. Now, if you don't know what I mean, certain pieces of media will change marketing material as to not spoil a big reveal that's present in the final product. A very notable example of this is Thor Ragnarok. If you've watched that film, you know at the end of the movie, or nearing the end of the film, he loses his eye. In the trailer, it doesn't show his eye gone because that would spoil a big thing that happens in the movie. You know, they didn't want to spoil it for fans, so they just made it look like in the trailer he didn't lose his eye at all, so it was still a surprise. Now, this is done with a lot of movies. It's done with some video games as well. Mass Effect 3, in the trailer for Mass Effect 3, there's a scene where Commander Shepard has all of his gear on, he's got his guns, he's got his armor on, and he's vaulting over this piece of metal. Now, in the actual game, this takes place directly at the beginning when you don't have any of those items. You don't have your armor, you've only got a pistol, and that's pretty much it, but they got rid of it as to not spoil the moment in the game. Now, where The Last of Us did something incredibly wrong, and I don't think Naughty Dog should have done this at all, they took scenes of Joel, and in the trailers they changed the character model from young Joel, because these were originally taken from flashbacks, and they changed it for the trailer into old Joel, making us believe that there would be scenes between Ellie and Joel when they're both older, which isn't what happened at all, which is incredibly misleading and incredibly disappointing in my opinion, because I was looking forward to these really cool scenes. Okay, there's this scene with Jesse in the game. In the trailer, it shows Joel grabbing Ellie by the mouth and saying, "You didn't think I was going to let you do this by yourself." That would have been a really cool moment in the game. In the actual game, it turns out it's Jesse. He comes from behind her, grabs her by the mouth, pulls her back, and says, "You didn't think I was going to let you do this by yourself." I found it so jarring, personally, because that was a scene that I was looking forward to. I wanted, you know, Ellie and Joel to team up one last time, you know. Even though they've got differences, they may not be as close as they used to, they were going to team up one last time. I wanted them to interact the way they used to in the first game, but we never got that. And I think I see what Naughty Dog was trying to do. They didn't want to spoil Joel's death. They wanted to make players believe that, you know, Joel is fine, and, you know, Joel isn't going to die, you're all wrong, because that was what everyone was saying for years. But it's just misleading in my opinion, and it led to me feeling really disappointed, because I love Joel as a character, and I love Joel and Ellie and their relationship and their bond and the way they work together, and I was really looking forward to some more moments where they work together, but, you know, despite their differences, despite the fact they don't see eye to eye, it would have just been a really cool moment, and I feel like it was wasted, you know. A lot of stuff like this happened. There's some screenshots of you know, Joel, the exact scenes he's from and where he was replaced and stuff like that, and I think it was a really strange way to market your game. This misleads your fans entirely, and it defeats the point of a trailer, in my opinion. If you can't show it, don't show it, you know. Don't swap out assets and try and fool people into thinking it's something completely different. Okay, time to address one of the more controversial criticisms of the game, and I'd have to say it's one of my personal criticisms as well. It's Joel's death. I get that Joel had to die, but I personally didn't think his death did his character justice. I think the game could have really benefited from some character moments and interactions between Ellie and Joel before his death. I just don't think he did enough. It felt premature. And again, I think maybe that could be because I was disappointed due to the trailers being deceiving. But I really, really wanted some more, at least one more playable section where you get to play as Ellie and Joel, and they're just doing their thing. And I really think the game could have benefited from that, because we didn't get that. To be fair as well, I mean, Ellie and Joel's dynamic would be completely different now they'd both grown up. You know, Ellie could handle herself more, he didn't need Joel to watch over her back all the time. And it just would have been such a nice callback to the first game. I think something that The Last of Us 2 doesn't do enough of, it doesn't honour the first game enough. It doesn't mean it's a bad game. I think The Last of Us Part 2 is fucking amazing. And that doesn't mean it doesn't fit with the first game. It definitely fits tonally and chronologically with the first game very well. But it didn't pay homage to the first game as much as I would have liked it to. Because the first game was such a unique experience, and it failed to look back on the successes that the first game had. I get that Joel had to die, I really do. His time had come, he was a bad dude. You know, he should have let Ellie die in the Firefly Hospital, I understand. But they should have done more with him before he died. Because I think his death was, for me, a little bit disappointing. Don't get me wrong, the scene was powerful. It was heavy. I was sitting there. If I could go back and look at the look on my face when I was watching that scene, it was probably one of absolute terror. But I still believe that Joel's death was premature. I would have liked to see more of him. I would have liked to see more of old man Joel. But we didn't get that, and it was disappointing. And finally, my third and final gripe with this game has got to be playing as Abby. Now, hear me out. I don't necessarily mind playing as Abby. I think it was actually incredibly interesting how they blurred the moral lines between Ellie's motives and Abby's motives. In the sense that it makes you feel, once you get to the end of the story, that nobody was necessarily in the right or wrong. Everyone was just in that sort of grey area in between. They were just getting vengeance for someone who had wronged them, and it was almost like a domino effect where someone would get vengeance on one person, another one would go after the other. Neither one, Ellie or Abby, neither of them were necessarily right, because all actions have consequences. Just like Joel's actions had consequences, Ellie's actions had consequences, and Abby's actions had consequences. My problem with having to play as Abby is we had to play as her for as long as we did. I understand we had to gain rapport with Abby, we begin the game hating her, and end the game feeling pretty indifferent about her existence, much like Ellie did right at the end. I get what Naughty Dog were doing, but I don't think we got enough time with Ellie. I love Ellie as a character, and what we got of her in this game, I absolutely love. But I don't think she was given enough of a spotlight. Joel was the main character of the first game, and we got to play as Ellie for a bit, but it was hardly a 50-50 split. Whereas in this game, Ellie is the main character, and yet we spend far too long, in my opinion, playing as the antagonist. For lack of a better word, I wouldn't necessarily say Abby is outright the antagonist of the game. In some ways, this tactic worked, because I didn't actually mind Abby in the end, and they wrote her story in a very compelling way. The side characters went a long way to humanize the wolves, and I actually think it was done really well. But I just wish there was more Ellie. I almost felt as if I didn't really know her character that well. Like, I had a lot of questions regarding Ellie and who she was and how she developed throughout the course of this game before playing it. And honestly, after playing it, I have more questions about her character than I do answers. Who knows, maybe I need to replay it, maybe I need to have another crack at it, maybe take a step back, look at the game, change my opinions on it. But this is how I feel as of literally just completing the game. This video is basically a ramble of all of my thoughts that I scrolled down onto a notepad after finishing the game. So these are my initial opinions and thoughts on the game. Who knows, maybe I'll come back in a few years time and I'll replay it and I'll do a proper structured video on it where I write a whole script and I go over every small minute detail. But I don't think it's time for that yet. I've got a lot of other stuff going on, a lot of other games I need to play. My Witcher 3 video is still in the works. It's been a very long time since the 5-year anniversary, but I'm still going to get that done. The script is very, very long, and it's only growing as the days go by, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, The Last of Us Part 2, I never intended on making a video on it, but it's affected me in such a way that I felt like I had to discuss this with you guys, just because it's one of those games. I've got to say, this game really touched my heart, and it made me feel emotions that I haven't felt for a game in a long time. You know, like tenseness, caring about the characters, being genuinely sad for the experiences of these completely fictional characters. But also Naughty Dog is incredibly good at not only writing the tragic side, but also showing the good parts and the happy parts of games. It's always amazing when a game developer can make you feel attached to characters that are completely fictional. The story of The Last of Us Part 2 is undoubtedly a story of tragedy, love, friendship, and loss, as well as a story about losing yourself and forgetting what actually matters to you. But I think it serves almost as a lesson that the moral lines can be blurred between what you think is right and what someone else may think is right. I think it just depends on the perspective. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with what is my favourite scene in the entire game, and one that I actually may or may not have shed a tear at when it played during the game. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care.
Hello? Ellie?
Jesus. Almost gave me a heart attack.
I tried knocking, but
Hey,
hey,
what's up, Joel?
just checking in. Folks are, talking about how impressed they are with you and how well you're helping out.
It's good.
Yeah. Tommy and I went out riding the other day, and he told me a joke, and I thought about you. It's oh shoot, now I forgot it. Something about a clock. How do you?
Joel, it's pretty late, and I gotta get up in a few hours.
Yeah. I know. I'm gonna get out of your hair. Just I want to show you something. Just give me 1 second.
What's this?
Some folks call this thing here a guitar.
Funny.
You want to hear something?
Okay.
Okay. Promise me that you won't laugh.
I won't laugh. I won't.
I'm trusting you. If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed. to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts I've no need for anymore. 'Cause I believe, and I believe 'cause I can see our future days, days of you and me. There you go.
Well, that didn't suck.
I'll take what I can get. She's yours.
No. No. I don't know the first thing about
I
this.
promised that I'd teach you how to play.
You did.
So what do you say, tomorrow night? First lesson?
Deal.
Okay. Okay.
Do you remember the joke?
What is the downside to eating a clock? It's time consuming.
That's so dumb.
Yeah. Good night, kiddo.